The wrench slipped from David Reed's greasy fingers for the third time in an hour, clattering against the metal floor of the maintenance tunnel beneath Orbital Station Meridian. His back ached from crawling through the narrow service passages, and his coveralls were soaked with sweat. The station's life support systems had been acting up all week, and as one of the few humans willing to work the overnight shift, David found himself fixing problems that had been ignored for months. He wiped his hands on a rag and checked his watch. 23:47. Another 13 minutes until his shift ended, then he could grab a few hours of sleep before his morning classes at the technical college. The student loans weren't going to pay themselves, and the extra credits from night maintenance work were the only thing keeping him afloat. A sharp hiss echoed through the tunnel as another pressure valve released. David sighed and crawled toward the sound. His knees protested against the cold metal floor, but he ignored the discomfort. This was temporary, he reminded himself. Just another 2 years of school, then he could get a proper engineering position somewhere better than this aging transit station. The valve was easy enough to fix, just a loose coupling that needed tightening. As David worked, he could hear the distant sounds of the station's late-night activity, passengers arriving and departing on transports heading to every corner of known space, cargo haulers loading supplies, and the constant hum of machinery keeping 30,000 souls alive in the void. David finished the repair and began crawling back toward the access hatch. His shift supervisor would want a report. Then he could finally head home to his tiny apartment in the station's residential sector. The place wasn't much, just a bed, a desk, and a small food preparation unit. But it was his emerging from the maintenance tunnel, David found himself. In the lower level of the main transit hub, even at this late hour, the area bustled with activity. Beings from dozens of different worlds moved through the corridors, some heading to departure gates, others arriving from long journeys. The diversity never ceased to amaze him. Blue-skinned Andorians with their distinctive antennae, towering cetacean traders whose environmental suits leaked water onto the floor, small furry creatures whose names he could never pronounce. David made his way toward the maintenance office, dodging a cargo bot that beeped angrily at him for being in its path as he walked. Something caught his attention near the automated transit kiosks. A figure stood alone before one of the machines, clearly struggling with the interface. The being was elderly. That much was obvious, even across species lines. His silver-scaled skin showed the deep lines of advanced age, and his movements were slow and deliberate. He wore simple gray robes that had seen better days, and his posture suggested both dignity and weariness. David paused, watching as the alien tried repeatedly to navigate the transit system's holographic interface. Other passengers moved around him with the casual indifference common to busy transit hubs. A few muttered complaints about the delay, but no one offered assistance. Most beings kept to their own kind in places like this, and helping strangers was often seen as suspicious or intrusive. The old alien's shoulders sagged with frustration as the machine chirped an error message for the 4th time. David glanced toward the maintenance office where his supervisor waited, then back at the struggling passenger. His shift was over. The report could wait a few minutes. "Excuse me," David said softly, approaching the kiosk. "Do you need help with the system?" The alien turned, revealing kind eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience and sadness. "I am having difficulty," he admitted, his voice carrying a melodic accent. "These human-designed interfaces are unfamiliar to me." David nodded understandingly. "They can be tricky. Sometimes the translation protocols don't work perfectly. What destination are you trying to reach?" "The Ashran sector," the alien replied. "I require passage to the 3rd planet." David's fingers moved over the interface with practiced ease. Ashran sector was way out on the rim, not a popular destination, which explained why the automated system was giving trouble. "That's going to require 2 transfers," he explained. "First to Gateway Station, then a smaller transport to Ashran 3. The total cost will be about 800 credits. The alien's expression grew troubled. He reached into his robes and withdrew a small pouch, counting out worn credit chips with careful precision. After a long moment, he looked up at David with embarrassment. I appear to be short of the required amount. David studied the alien's face, seeing pride warring with necessity. This was clearly someone who wasn't used to asking for help. The worn clothing and careful handling of the credits told a story of reduced circumstances, but the alien's bearing suggested he hadn't always been poor. "Let me check something," David said, turning back to the interface. He pretended to examine the routing options while actually accessing his own account. The balance wasn't great. His next tuition payment was due in a week, but he had enough to cover the difference. "Actually, there's a maintenance discount available," David said casually, lying smoothly. "Since I work for the station, I can apply it to your purchase that brings the total down to what you have." The alien studied David with curious intensity, as if seeing something unexpected. "You would do this for a stranger?" "It's just a system discount," David replied, initiating the transfer from his own account. "Nothing special." The elderly being was quiet for a long moment. "I am called Elder Tam," he said finally. "May I ask your name?" "David Reed." "David Reed," Elder Tam repeated carefully as if committing it to memory. "I will not forget this kindness." The transit tickets printed from the machine, and David handed them over with a smile. "Safe travels, Elder Tam. I hope you find what you're looking for in the Ashran sector." Elder Tam accepted the tickets with formal grace. "Perhaps our paths will cross again." David Reed. "In my experience, the universe has a way of rewarding those who show compassion to strangers." David watched as the old alien made his way toward the departure gates, moving with quiet dignity despite his obvious fatigue. There was something about Elder Tam that seemed different from other passengers, an air of importance that his humble circumstances couldn't quite hide. Shaking his head, David headed toward the maintenance office. His supervisor would want that valve report, and he still had to review his engineering notes before tomorrow's exam. The encounter with Elder Tam was already fading into the background of another ordinary night shift on orbital station Meridian. As he filled out his maintenance log, David had no way of knowing that his simple act of kindness had been carefully observed and evaluated, or that in just a few hours, his quiet life would change forever. 3 hours after Elder Tam's transport disappeared into the starfield, David Reed was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning air recycling unit when the proximity alarms began screaming. The sound cut through the station like a blade, echoing off every bulkhead and making his teeth ache. David had heard proximity alerts before, usually for incoming cargo freighters with faulty transponders or navigation errors. But this was different. This was the deep, bone-rattling wail reserved for unidentified contacts approaching at high speed. Emergency lighting bathed the maintenance corridor in pulsing red as automated announcements began broadcasting in 17 different languages. All personnel report to designated safety stations. Unknown vessels detected approaching orbital station Meridian. Repeat. Unknown vessels detected. David dropped his tools and climbed out of the access panel, his heart racing. Other maintenance workers were already running past, heading for the emergency stations. Their faces showed the controlled panic that came with living in space. One hull breach, one system failure, one moment of carelessness, and 30,000 people could die in the void. "What's happening?" David called out to Bill, one of the senior technicians. 5 contacts just decloaked 2,000 kilometers out," Bill shouted back without stopping. "Big ones. Security doesn't recognize the ship signatures." David followed the flow of workers toward the nearest observation deck. The corridor filled with beings from dozens of worlds, all united in their desire to see what had triggered the alerts. Conversation buzzed in multiple languages, but the underlying tension was universal. The observation deck was packed when David arrived, beings pressed against the transparent aluminum windows that looked out into space. He pushed through the crowd until he could see for himself, and what he saw took his breath away. 5 vessels hung in space like massive sculptures carved from crystal and starlight. Each ship was at least 2 kilometers long, their hulls seeming to bend and refract the light from Meridian's central star. They possessed a flowing organic beauty that made the station's utilitarian design look crude by comparison. Yet despite their elegance, there was something undeniably powerful about them, a sense of vast energy barely contained, Never seen anything like them, whispered a blue-skinned trader standing next to David. Look at how they move. David watched as the ships adjusted their positions with impossible grace, sliding through space without visible thrust or propulsion. No flames, no energy discharges, just smooth movement that seemed to defy physics. The formations they maintained were precise to the meter, suggesting advanced coordination and control. They're beautiful, someone murmured from the crowd. They're terrifying, another voice countered. David found himself agreeing with both assessments. The ships were gorgeous, but their very presence was unsettling. There was something about their design that spoke of technology far beyond anything in known space. The fact that they had appeared from nowhere, bypassing all long-range sensors, only made them more ominous. Station security broadcasts crackled over the intercom, requesting all civilians to remain calm and await further instructions. David could hear the barely controlled fear in the announcer's voice. Even the security forces were rattled by this development. Look, someone called out. They're moving. Körperführer. Lead vessel was indeed approaching the station, its crystalline hull growing larger in the observation windows. Other beings pressed closer to the glass, trying to get a better view. David noticed that several aliens in the crowd were backing away from the windows, their body language suggesting recognition or fear. A new announcement echoed through the station. This one different from the standard. Security alerts. The voice was crisp, professional, and spoke in perfect Galactic Standard Orbital Station Meridian. This is High Commander Vale of the Meridian House Fleet. We request immediate priority docking and seek audience with the human who aided Elder Tam approximately 3 hours ago. We come in peace and mean no harm to your station or its inhabitants. The crowd on the observation deck erupted in confused murmurs. David felt his blood turn to ice water. The human who aided Elder Tam. He was the only human who had interacted with the elderly alien tonight. He was sure of it. The night shift was mostly automated and human personnel were rare in the transit areas. Did they say Elder Tam? A nearby Centaurian whispered, That's a Meridian House title. I haven't heard that name in decades. Meridian House? Another being replied, But that's just a legend. They vanished from galactic politics generations ago. David's mind raced as conversations swirled around him. Meridian House. He had heard the name before, dimly remembered from his galactic history classes. Something about one of the oldest noble families in known space, but he couldn't recall the details. What was clear was that Elder Tam was much more than a simple elderly traveler station. Security was requesting the fleet identify their intentions and submit to standard boarding procedures. The response came quickly and politely, but with an undertone that brooked no argument. Priority docking would be appreciated, and they would be boarding whether permission was granted or not. The 5 ships began moving toward the station's largest docking bays with calm inevitability. Whoever helped that old alien is in deep trouble. Someone in the crowd muttered, or deep fortune. Another voice countered, The Meridian House doesn't send 5 warships for minor matters. David backed away from the observation windows, his heart pounding. He needed to think, needed to figure out what he had stumbled into. The simple act of helping an elderly passenger buy a transit ticket had somehow triggered the arrival of what appeared to be one of the most powerful fleets anyone had ever seen. The crowd continued to press against the windows as the lead ship approached the main docking bay. David could see the elegant curve of its hull, the way light seemed to flow across its surface like liquid. The ship was enormous up close, dwarfing the station's largest cargo vessels. Emergency broadcasts continued to echo through the corridors, but now they carried a different tone. Station. Administration was scrambling to accommodate the unexpected visitors, clearing docking bays and preparing reception areas. The panic was giving way to nervous efficiency, as it became clear the fleet wasn't immediately hostile. David made his way back through the corridors, trying to blend in with the other maintenance workers. Nobody seemed to have connected him to the mysterious summons yet, but that wouldn't last long. The station's personnel records would quickly identify him as the only human working in the transit area during Elder Tam's visit. His communicator chirped with a message from his supervisor. All maintenance staff report. To emergency stations. Looks like we're going to have very important visitors. Need all hands ready for anything. As David headed toward his assigned station, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The kind gesture that had seemed so simple 3 hours ago was about to have consequences. He never could have imagined behind him, through the station's windows, 5 ships of impossible beauty and power took their positions like pieces on a cosmic chessboard. And somewhere among them was the answer to what Elder Tam had really been doing on an obscure transit station, buying passage to the Galactic Rim with worn credit, chips and humble dignity. Station Administrator Walsh was sweating through his dress uniform as he led the delegation from the mysterious fleet through Meridian's main corridors. David watched from a maintenance alcove as the group passed, trying to make himself invisible. Among the pipes and conduits, the delegation consisted of 7 beings, each one radiating an authority that made hardened security officers step aside without question. Their leader was tall and elegant, with the same silver-scaled skin as Elder Tam but bearing herself with unmistakable command presence. Her robes were magnificent, deep blue fabric that seemed to contain flowing stars, cut in a style that spoke of ancient tradition and immense wealth. "High Commander Vale," Administrator Walsh was saying, his voice pitched higher than usual with nervousness. "I assure you, we're conducting a thorough search for the individual you mentioned. However, our records show hundreds of personnel on duty during that time period, and the search is unnecessary," the High Commander interrupted smoothly. "We will know him when we see him. Our methods are quite precise." David felt his stomach drop as the delegation continued past his hiding spot. The High Commander's words carried absolute certainty, as if she possessed some method of identification that made databases and security footage irrelevant. He needed to decide quickly: continue hiding and let them hunt him down, or step forward voluntarily. The choice was made for him when one of the delegation members, a being whose features were hidden beneath an elegant mask, suddenly stopped walking and turned directly toward David's alcove. Their gaze seemed to pierce right through the shadows and maintenance equipment. "High Commander," the masked figure said quietly, "I believe we have found our quarry." The entire delegation turned toward David's position, and he knew hiding was pointless. He stepped out of the alcove, his maintenance coveralls making him feel even more out of place among these beings who moved like living royalty. Administrator Walsh's eyes went wide with recognition and horror. "Reed, what are you doing here?" I ordered all maintenance personnel to. "David Reed," High Commander Vale said, and her voice carried a tone of satisfaction. "We meet at last." She approached him with fluid grace, studying his face with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. David found himself standing straighter. Despite his nervousness, there was something about her presence that demanded respect. "Even as it intimidated, ma'am," David managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I think there might be some misunderstanding. I just helped an elderly passenger with a ticket purchase. Nothing more." High Commander Vale smiled, and the expression transformed her severe features into something almost warm. "There is no misunderstanding, David Reed. What you did tonight was exactly what we hoped to find." Administrator Walsh looked between them with growing confusion. "Commander Vale, if I may ask, what exactly is this about? Our records show that maintenance technician Reed had a routine interaction with a passenger, but surely that doesn't warrant." "Elder Tam is my grandfather," High Commander Vale said simply. The words hit the corridor like a physical force. Administrator Walsh actually staggered backward, while several security officers exchanged looks of shock. Even David, who knew little about galactic politics, understood the implications. The elderly being he had helped wasn't just some dignitary. He was family to whoever commanded this incredible fleet. "Your grandfather was traveling alone," David said carefully, "in simple clothes with barely enough credits for passage to Ashran 3. High Commander Vale nodded approvingly. "You are observant. Yes, he was traveling as he has for the past 20 years, incognito, testing the character of various worlds and species. What you witnessed was not poverty but choice." She gestured to one of her companions, who produced a small device and activated it. A holographic display appeared in the corridor, showing images that made Administrator Walsh gasp in recognition. Ancient star charts, genealogical records, and what appeared to be historical documentation, dating back millennia. House Meridian is among the oldest noble families in this galaxy, High Commander Vale explained. We have existed since before most current civilizations discovered faster-than-light travel. Our influence once spanned hundreds of star systems, and our fleets were legendary throughout known space. The holographic display shifted to show images of massive fleets and grand ceremonies, beings from countless worlds paying tribute to figures wearing robes similar to those the High Commander wore. David realized he was looking at the visual record of a galactic power that had apparently vanished from common knowledge. 23 years ago, my grandfather made a decision that shocked our entire house. Vale continued. He chose to abdicate his position as Supreme Elder and go into voluntary exile. His stated reason was that our family had grown too isolated from the common beings we claimed to protect. We had forgotten what it meant to show simple kindness without expectation of reward. Administrator Walsh found his voice. But why give up such power? Because power without compassion becomes tyranny, Vale replied. My grandfather believed that true nobility comes from one's actions, not one's bloodline. He has spent the past 2 decades wandering the galaxy, observing how different species treat strangers in need. Most of his experiences have been disappointing. David began to understand where this was leading. He was testing people. Indeed, every interaction was carefully observed and recorded. Most beings who encountered him either ignored his apparent difficulties or attempted to take advantage of what they perceived as weakness. Some offered help, but only when they believed they might gain something in return. The holographic display changed again, showing data streams and analysis. Reports David caught glimpses of percentages and statistics, all painted in shades of red that suggested disappointing results. In 20 years of testing, High Commander Vale said quietly, exactly 17 beings have offered assistance to Elder Tam with no expectation of reward or recognition. 17 individuals across dozens of worlds and hundreds of encounters. Until tonight. She stepped closer to David, her expression intense. You not only offered help freely, you went further. You used your own resources to solve his problem while allowing him to maintain his dignity. You treated a stranger with respect and kindness, simply because it was the right thing to do. David felt heat rising in his cheeks. It was just a transit ticket anyone would have. No. Vale interrupted firmly. They would not. We have extensive data proving otherwise. Your action tonight was so rare, so genuine that it triggered protocols we established decades ago. When someone demonstrates the kind of character we have been seeking, we are summoned immediately. Administrator Walsh was staring at David with new eyes, clearly reevaluating everything he thought he knew about the maintenance worker. Reed, I had no idea you were involved in anything like this. Neither did I, David replied honestly. High Commander Vale smiled again, which is precisely what makes your action so valuable. You helped Elder Tam because you saw someone in need, not because you recognized his importance. You asked for nothing in return, expected no reward, and attempted to preserve his dignity throughout the interaction. She gestured to her companions, and they began to form a more formal arrangement around her. David Reed, your demonstration of character tonight has earned you something that has not been offered to anyone in over 2 decades, the chance to join us in a mission of vital importance to every living being in this galaxy. David's mind reeled. Join you in what? That, High Commander Vale said, is a conversation that requires privacy and time. Are you willing to hear what we have to offer? Looking around at the faces surrounding him, Administrator Walsh's shock, the security officer's awe, and the delegation's patient expectation, David realized that his quiet life on orbital station Meridian was already over. The only question now was what would replace it. I'm listening, he said. High Commander Vale nodded with satisfaction. Then let us adjourn to more suitable accommodations. There is much to discuss, and the fate of more worlds than you can imagine may depend on your decision. The conference room aboard High Commander Vale's flagship was unlike anything David had ever seen. Walls that seemed to be made of captured starlight curved around them in impossible geometries, while furniture that appeared to be grown rather than built adjusted itself automatically to accommodate each being's physiology. David found himself seated in a chair that molded perfectly to his human frame, more comfortable than anything he had ever experienced. Elder Tam sat across from him, no longer wearing the simple gray robes David remembered. Instead, he was dressed in ceremonial garments that marked him as what he truly was, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The transformation was startling, but his eyes remained the same, kind, wise, and filled with the patience of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. "I apologize for the deception," David Reed, Elder Tam, said, his voice carrying the same gentle tone from their first meeting, "but it was necessary to observe your true character without the influence of rank or expectation." High Commander Vale activated a holographic display that filled the center of the eye room with images that made David's breath catch in his throat. Entire star systems reduced to empty space, planets stripped of all life, fleets of ships drifting as lifeless hulks. The destruction was absolute and terrifying. "What you are seeing," Vale explained, "is the aftermath of encounters with an ancient threat we call the Void Swarm. They appeared first in the Galactic Rim, approximately 50 years ago, consuming everything in their path. The display shifted to show creatures that defied easy description. They moved like living shadows, their forms constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. Some appeared mechanical, others organic, but all of them radiated a wrongness that made David's skin crawl. Even viewing them through holographic projection felt deeply unsettling. "They are not merely destroying worlds," Elder Tam continued. "They are consuming them entirely, leaving behind regions of space where nothing can exist, matter, energy. Even the fundamental forces that hold reality together are absorbed and converted into more of their kind." David studied the images with growing horror. "How many worlds have they taken?" 17 star systems completely consumed," Vale replied. "Another 34 partially harvested before our forces managed to evacuate the survivors. We estimate that over 2 billion sentient beings have been lost." The numbers were too vast for David to truly comprehend. He had lived his entire life on a single station, worrying about student loans and maintenance schedules. The idea of billions of lives simply erased was beyond his ability to process. "Traditional military responses have proven completely ineffective," Vale continued. "The swarm adapts to every weapon we deploy, every tactic we employ. They learn from each encounter and develop countermeasures with frightening speed. Our most advanced fleets barely manage to slow their advance, let alone stop it." Elder Tam leaned forward, his expression grave. "Worse, prolonged exposure to the swarm appears to affect the minds of those who fight them. Our bravest warriors return from encounters changed, their capacity for hope and compassion diminished. It is as if the swarm feeds not just on matter and energy, but on the positive qualities that make life worth preserving." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. "They're consuming hope itself." "An astute observation," Vale said approvingly, "which brings us to why we have sought individuals like yourself. Our ancient archives contain references to this threat from previous encounters, dating back millions of years. The records suggest that beings who possess genuine compassion and moral clarity can resist the swarm's influence longer than others." The holographic display changed to show ancient texts and symbols that hurt to look at directly. As if they contained concepts too large for human minds to fully grasp, David caught fragments of meaning, references to light that could not be extinguished, courage that grew stronger in darkness, and hope that endured beyond reason. "The archives are incomplete and often cryptic," Elder Tam admitted, "but they consistently indicate that the swarm's greatest weakness lies not in superior firepower or advanced technology, but in something far more fundamental: the ability to maintain compassion in the face of absolute horror, to choose hope when all logic suggests despair." Vale gestured, and the display showed a star map marking the current. Position of the swarm forces, they are moving steadily toward the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. Our projections indicate they will reach the major population centers within 10 years. Unless we find a way to stop them, every civilization in the galaxy will face extinction. David stared at the advancing tide of destruction, trying to comprehend the scale of what he was seeing. And you think my helping Elder Tam buy a ticket somehow qualifies me to fight this thing? Your action demonstrates something we have been searching for across the galaxy, Vale explained. The ability to show kindness without expectation of reward, to see need and respond without calculation or self-interest. These qualities are exceptionally rare, especially among species that have achieved interstellar travel, Elder. Tam nodded sadly. Technological advancement often comes at the cost of emotional development. Most civilizations become focused on efficiency, profit, and expansion. The simple virtues of compassion and selflessness are seen as weaknesses to be overcome, but you believe these virtues are actually weapons against the swarm, David said, beginning to understand. Not weapons, Vale corrected, something far more powerful. The ancient texts speak of individuals who could walk among the swarm without being consumed, who could find patterns and weaknesses that others could not perceive. They describe these beings as light bearers, those who carry hope into places where hope should not be able to exist. The holographic display shifted again, showing David's own actions from earlier that evening. The scene played out in perfect detail, his approach to Elder Tam, their conversation, the quiet transfer of credits. The recording captured not just what happened, but somehow conveyed the emotional context. As well, David could see his own motivations laid bare, the simple desire to help without any thought of gain. In 20 years of testing, Elder Tam said quietly, we have identified 17 individuals across dozens of species who demonstrated the qualities we seek. All of them have agreed to join our coalition, and all of them have proven capable of resisting the swarm's influence to varying degrees. Vale stood, her expression intense. David Reed, we are offering you the chance to join this group, to become part of humanity's first contribution to a galactic coalition dedicated to stopping the greatest threat our universe has ever known. David felt the weight of the offer settling on his shoulders. What exactly would I be doing fighting these creatures directly? Initially, training, Vale replied. Learning to strengthen and focus the qualities that make you valuable. Understanding the nature of the threat and developing techniques for approaching it safely. The work is dangerous. Several of our light bearers have been lost in reconnaissance missions, but it may be the only hope for stopping the swarm's advance. Elder Tam's eyes met David's across the table. I will not lie to you, young human. The path we offer is difficult and uncertain. Many who begin this journey do not complete it, but for those who succeed, the reward is the preservation of everything we hold dear. David looked around the conference room, taking in the impossible technology and the beings who commanded power beyond his imagination. Hours ago, his biggest concern had been passing his engineering exams. Now he was being asked to help save the galaxy from an ancient evil that consumed hope itself. You said humanity's first contribution, David said slowly. Does that mean my world doesn't know about any of this? Vale exchanged a glance with Elder Tam. Earth's governments have been contacted and briefed on the situation. Your species' leaders are considering their response, but individual recruitment has always been our primary method. The qualities we seek cannot be commanded or assigned. They must be chosen freely. David thought about his small apartment, his student loans, his quiet life fixing air recyclers and pressure valves. Everything that had seemed so important that morning now felt incredibly distant and small. By comparison, the fate of billions of lives and the future of galactic civilization made his personal concerns seem trivial. If I say no, he asked, what happens? You return to your life, Elder Tam replied simply. Your memory of these events will be adjusted to remove classified information, and you will remember only that you helped an elderly traveler. There will be no consequences or judgment. And if I say yes, High Commander Vale smiled, Then your real education begins. Sleep refused to come as David lay in the guest quarters aboard Vale's flagship. The bed was more luxurious than anything he had ever experienced, automatically adjusting its temperature and firmness to his body's needs. But his mind churned with impossible decisions through the transparent walls of his room. He could see the vast starfield beyond, each point of light representing worlds that might fall to the void swarm if he and others like him failed. Elder Tam had given him 3 days to decide, but David knew the choice would haunt him regardless of what he chose. Walk away from this and return to his mundane life. Always wondering if he could have made a difference, stay and face horrors that could strip away his humanity. Assuming he survived long enough for that to matter, a soft chime indicated someone requesting entry. David sat up, expecting to see Vale or one of her advisors. Instead, Elder Tam stepped through the doorway, carrying 2 steaming cups that filled the room with an aroma both alien and comforting. "I hoped you might be awake," the elder said, offering one of the cups. "This is a blend from my homeworld. It helps calm troubled thoughts." David accepted the drink gratefully, finding it tasted like warm honey mixed with something that reminded him of Earth's cinnamon. "Thank you, I keep thinking about those images of the destroyed worlds." Elder Tam settled into a chair that formed itself from the floor, his movements showing the weariness of someone who had carried heavy burdens for too long. "I have seen the aftermath firsthand. It is worse than the recordings can convey. The swarm doesn't simply destroy, it erases every trace of the life that once existed, every memory, every dream. Everything that made those worlds unique is consumed and forgotten." "How do you bear it?" David asked. "Knowing what's coming and being unable to stop it." "By remembering that we are not yet defeated," Elder Tam replied. "Each light bearer we find represents hope. Each individual who chooses compassion over indifference weakens the swarm's ultimate power. Your decision tonight may seem small in the face of such vast destruction, but small choices have changed the course of galactic history before." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, sipping the alien tea and watching the stars. David found himself thinking about the maintenance tunnels of Orbital Station, Meridian, the simple problems that had solutions involving wrenches and replacement parts. This new reality was overwhelmingly complex, but perhaps the basic principle was the same: identify what was broken and try to fix it. "There's something I need to know," David said finally. "When you tested me tonight, was it really random or did you specifically choose me for some reason?" Elder Tam smiled, the expression lighting up his ancient features. "An excellent question. You were not chosen randomly, David. Read your personnel files indicated someone who consistently went beyond minimum requirements in his work, who stayed late to help colleagues, who had never filed a complaint despite working in difficult conditions. These are small indicators, but they suggested character worth testing." David felt slightly unsettled by the revelation. "You investigated me before we met. We investigate everyone we encounter," Elder Tam replied without apology. "The stakes are too high for anything less than thorough preparation, but investigation can only reveal patterns of behavior. It cannot predict how someone will respond to an actual test of character that required our meeting." A new thought occurred to David. "How many humans have you tested?" "You are the 7th member of your species to undergo evaluation," Elder Tam said. "The others showed varying degrees of promise, but none demonstrated the combination of instinctive compassion and moral courage that we witnessed tonight." "What happened to them?" "They returned to their lives with adjusted memories," Elder Tam replied. "There is no shame in failing our tests. The qualities we seek are extraordinarily rare, which is precisely what makes them valuable." David set down his cup and walked to the transparent wall. Gazing out at the cosmos beyond the flagship, the other 4 vessels of Vale's fleet moved in precise formations, their crystalline hulls catching and refracting starlight. The sight was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "If I agree to this," David said, "what happens to my family? My friends? They'll never know what became of me." "That is not necessarily true," Elder Tam replied. "Should you succeed in your training and prove capable of the work ahead, there may be opportunities To contact them, your species will likely become involved in the coalition efforts as the threat becomes more widely known. Elder Tam rose and joined David at the window. But I will not lie to you. This path will change you irrevocably. The person who returns to Earth years from now will not be the same maintenance worker who left Orbital Station Meridian. The question you must answer is whether that change serves a purpose worthy of the sacrifice. Before David could respond, emergency alerts began sounding throughout the ship. The gentle lighting shifted to urgent amber, and Vale's voice echoed through the communication system. All personnel to station's long-range sensors have detected void swarm scouts in the outer system. Elder Tam's expression grew grim. It appears your time for deliberation has been shortened. They hurried to the bridge where David found himself surrounded by beings working with calm efficiency despite the crisis. Holographic displays showed the edge of the solar system, where several dark shapes moved with unnatural patterns that hurt to observe directly. Even filtered through the ship's sensors, the void swarm creatures projected an aura of wrongness that made David's skin crawl. 3 scout entities, Vale reported. As they arrived, they appeared simultaneously at multiple points around the system's perimeter, suggesting coordinated reconnaissance. Our long-range communications are already being disrupted. Elder Tam studied the tactical display with practiced eyes. They're probing for weaknesses, testing response times. The main force cannot be far behind. David watched the enemy contacts moving across the display, each one representing destruction on a scale he could barely comprehend. How long do we have? Unknown. Vale replied. Scouts typically observe for several days before reporting back to the main swarm, but their presence here, now, is deeply troubling. This system was not on our projected path of advance. A communications officer looked up from her station, her expression troubled. Hi, Commander. We're receiving multiple distress calls from civilian vessels in the outer system. Several freighters report engine failures and navigation system malfunctions. The swarm's influence, Elder Tam said quietly. Their presence disrupts the fundamental forces that technology depends upon. As they grow stronger, the effect spreads. David felt a chill of understanding. They're not just consuming matter and energy, they're unmaking the laws of physics themselves. Vale nodded approvingly. Your grasp of the situation is excellent. That is precisely what makes them so dangerous, and why conventional warfare fails against them. How do you fight an enemy that can alter the rules of reality? As if in answer to her question, one of the scout entities on the display suddenly accelerated toward a cargo freighter. The civilian vessel's distress call cut off abruptly, and its sensor signature simply vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, erased as if it had never existed. 57 souls aboard that freighter, Vale reported, her voice carefully controlled. Gone without even time for an escape pod launch. David stared at the empty space where the freighter had been, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The void swarm wasn't just a military threat. It was an existential horror that could erase people from existence itself. Every moment of hesitation meant more lives lost, more families destroyed. I don't need 3 days, David said suddenly, his voice cutting through the bridge's tense atmosphere. I'll do it. I'll join your coalition. Elder Tam turned to him with surprise. Are you certain this decision cannot be reversed once made? I'm certain, David replied, though his hands shook as he spoke. I can't go back to fixing air recyclers knowing that things like this exist. If there's even a chance that helping you could save lives, then I have to try. Vale smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Welcome to the coalition, David Reed. Your training begins immediately. As alarms continued to sound around them, and the void swarm scouts prowled the system's edge like cosmic predators, David realized that his old life was already gone. The question now was whether he could become someone capable of facing the darkness that threatened to consume everything he had ever known. What do I do first? He asked. You learn, Elder Tam replied, and you remember that even in the face of such horror, compassion remains our greatest weapon. 6 months later, David stood on the observation deck of the Coalition's hidden stronghold, watching supply ships arrive from across the galaxy. The massive space station hung in the shadow of a brown dwarf star, invisible to most sensors and protected by technology that made Vale's flagship seem primitive by comparison. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see vessels from dozens of different civilizations, all united in their determination to face the void. Swarm, his reflection in the window, showed changes that went beyond the coalition uniform he now wore. The training had been more intense than anything he could have imagined, pushing not just his physical capabilities but his mental and emotional resilience to their limits. He had learned to maintain compassion while witnessing horrors that would break most minds, to hold on to hope when logic screamed that defeat was inevitable. "Deep thoughts?" asked a voice behind him. David turned to find Alex Chen, another human who had arrived 3 months after him. Alex had been a teacher on Mars Colony, identified through similar testing by Elder Tam's agents. Their recruitment had followed the same pattern. A simple act of kindness observed and evaluated, followed by an invitation to join something larger than themselves. "Just thinking about how much has changed," David replied. 6 months ago I was worried about paying my student loans. Now I'm part of a secret coalition fighting to save the galaxy. Alex joined him at the window, her own expression thoughtful. "My principal thought I was having a nervous breakdown when I submitted my resignation. I couldn't tell her the real reason, obviously. The cover story about accepting a research position sounded weak even to me. They watched as a massive cargo vessel docked at one of the station's many ports. The ship bore the insignia of the Centaurian Republic, bringing supplies and volunteers to support the coalition's efforts. More and more civilizations were contributing. Resources as news of the Void Swarm's advance spread through diplomatic channels. "Any word from Earth?" Alex asked. "Some," David replied. "Elder Tam says the United Nations is taking the threat seriously now, especially after what happened to the Ross 128 system. Last I heard, they were preparing to send a delegation to meet with coalition leadership." The destruction of Ross 128 had been a turning point in galactic awareness of the swarm threat. An entire star system consumed in less than 48 hours. Despite the presence of joint military forces from 3 different species, the footage of the attack had been classified, but rumors spread quickly through diplomatic circles. "I keep wondering what my students would think if they knew where I ended up," Alex said. "Teaching kindergarten to training for missions into cosmic horror zones, it's quite a career change." David smiled, though the expression felt different than it had before the training. "At least you had experience working with small children. That's probably good preparation for some of our coalition partners." They were interrupted by the arrival of Commander Torres, a stern woman who served as liaison between the human recruits and coalition leadership. "Read, Chen, report to Training Bay 7 in 15 minutes. We've received new intelligence about swarm behavior patterns, and Elder Tam wants all." Lightbearers briefed immediately. David and Alex exchanged glances. The term Lightbearer still felt strange to them, but they had learned to accept their designation within the coalition's structure. They were part of an elite group now, 18 individuals from various species who had demonstrated the ability to resist void swarm influence while gathering critical intelligence about enemy capabilities. Training Bay 7 was packed when they arrived, filled with beings that represented the full diversity of galactic civilization. David recognized most of them now. Kira from the Andromedans, whose crystalline physiology allowed her to interface directly with certain technologies. Braun from the silicon-based Rockworld Federation, whose natural immunity to energy weapons made him invaluable for reconnaissance, and others whose unique capabilities complemented their shared resistance to swarm corruption. Elder Tam stood at the center of the bay, his appearance more formal than David had seen since their first meeting. The simple robes had been replaced with ceremonial garments that marked his true status within the coalition. But his eyes remained kind and patient. "My friends," Elder Tam began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "We have received troubling news from our forward observers. The Void Swarm has begun displaying new behaviors that suggest an acceleration of their advance toward the galactic core." Holographic displays activated around the chamber, showing star maps marked with the latest intelligence. David felt his stomach tighten. as he saw how much red now dominated the outer rim territories. Entire sectors marked as consumed or compromised, with projected expansion routes pointing inexorably toward the galaxy's most populated regions. More concerning, Elder Tam continued, is evidence that the swarm is adapting its tactics based on our previous encounters. They appear to have learned from their interactions with our light-bearer teams, and are developing countermeasures. Kira spoke up, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lighting. What kind of countermeasures? Psychological warfare, Elder Tam replied grimly. The entities are now projecting false distress signals designed to trigger our compassionate responses. They create scenarios specifically engineered to exploit the very qualities that make us effective against them. David felt a chill of understanding. They're using our humanity against us. Indeed, Elder Tam confirmed, our latest mission reports indicate that several teams have walked into traps baited with artificial suffering. The swarm entities can now mimic the emotional resonance of beings in genuine need, making it extremely difficult to distinguish between real emergencies and hostile deception. The implications were staggering. David had spent months learning to trust his instincts about suffering and need, to respond with compassion even in the face of cosmic horror. Now those same instincts could lead him into enemy traps. However, Elder Tam said, his tone shifting to something more hopeful, this adaptation also reveals something significant about our enemy. They would not need to develop such countermeasures unless our approach was genuinely threatening them. The fact that they are changing their behavior proves that compassion and moral courage remain effective weapons against them. Braun's rocky features shifted in what David had learned to recognize as thoughtful expression. Are you suggesting we continue with current mission protocols despite the increased danger? I am suggesting we evolve our approach as they have evolved theirs, Elder Tam replied. Which brings me to the primary reason for this briefing. We have received official authorization to begin Phase 2 of the Coalition's strategy, new displays activated, showing technical schematics and operational plans that David couldn't fully understand. The complexity was overwhelming, but certain elements were clear enough. Larger teams, more ambitious targets, and direct engagement with swarm forces rather than reconnaissance missions. Phase 2 involves establishing permanent outposts in contested regions, Elder Tam explained. Light-bearer teams will work with conventional forces to create zones of stability where evacuations can be organized and refugee populations protected. These outposts will serve as beacons of hope in regions where the swarm's psychological influence is strongest. Alex raised her hand. What about the countermeasures you mentioned? How do we avoid walking into traps? Elder Tam smiled with something approaching pride. By working together, your individual abilities to resist swarm influence are remarkable, but they become exponentially more powerful when combined. We believe that teams of light-bearers can validate each other's perceptions, providing redundancy against deception. David studied the mission parameters appearing on the displays. The Auberi scope was ambitious beyond anything they had attempted before. Instead of brief scouting missions into swarm territory, they would be establishing permanent presence in contested space. The risks were enormous, but so was the potential impact. When do we begin? He asked. Immediately, Elder Tam replied. Transport ships are being prepared for departure to 3 different outpost sites. Your teams will be deployed within 72 hours. As the briefing continued with tactical details and equipment assignments, David found his thoughts drifting back to Orbital Station Meridian. His old life seemed like something from another person's memories, a simple existence focused on immediate concerns and personal goals. The person he had become couldn't imagine. Returning to that limited perspective, through the chamber's windows he could see more ships arriving at the hidden station. Each one carried volunteers, supplies, or intelligence that would help in the fight against the Void Swarm. The galaxy was finally awakening to the threat, and beings from countless worlds were choosing to stand together rather than face extinction alone. One more thing, Elder Tam said as the briefing concluded. Recent intelligence suggests that Earth's delegation will arrive here within the month. Your species has decided to contribute not just individuals but resources and technology to the coalition effort. You should all be proud of how humanity has responded to this crisis. David felt a surge of emotion that surprised him with its intensity. Pride in his species, hope for the future, and determination to prove worthy of the trust placed in him. The simple maintenance worker who had helped an elderly alien buy a ticket was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the smallest acts of kindness could reshape the galaxy. As the light-bearers dispersed to prepare for their missions, David remained at the window, watching the flow of traffic around the coalition station. Each ship represented countless individual decisions to help rather than hide, to stand together rather than face the darkness alone. Elder Tam approached, moving with the quiet dignity David remembered from their first meeting. Second thoughts, young human. No, David replied without hesitation. Just amazed at how far we've come. A ticket purchase changed everything. Elder Tam smiled. Compassion always changes everything. The question is whether we have the courage to let it. As David headed to his quarters to prepare for departure, he carried with him the knowledge that his simple act of kindness had become part of something vast and important. The galaxy faced its darkest hour, but it would meet that darkness with the combined light of beings who chose hope over despair, compassion over indifference. The maintenance worker was gone, but the person he had become was exactly who the universe needed him to be.